Welcome to everybody who's joined us for the Campaign Against Empty Homes Day of Action online rally. My name is Will McMahon. I'll be your host for just over an hour. Our time is going to be packed with speakers from our studio and live streams from action protests taking place across the country. We'll be going from New York to York, from Devon to Dublin, and from Kensington to Southwark, and many other places in the next hour. Why are we here? Well, we're here because there are over 100,000 families living in temporary accommodation when we have at least 500,000 empty homes and underutilised properties. We also have council estates being run down all over the country with empty homes that could be retrofitted and brought back into use rather than demolished. So that we think there are more than enough empty homes for all those living in temporary accommodation, those in overcrowded accommodation, and those seeking refuge in Britain from around the world from all the crises that we can see. Meanwhile, new developments are shooting up all over the place. There are investment vehicles which are pushing up rents, pushing up mortgage costs, and creating emptiness nationwide. And they're adding hugely to the environmental crisis that we all know we face. All of our speakers and live protests will touch on these issues. So I'll say no more about them, but introduce you to our studio expert, Chris Bailey, who is Campaigns Manager for Action on Empty Homes. Chris, welcome to you. As an opener, Chris, Hi. Can you let us know how many empty homes, second homes and short lets there are in the country?
Well, you said there were at least 500,000 empty and underutilised homes. I'd probably push the number a little bit higher. I'd say there's about 1 million actually. There's in terms of long-term empty homes, we have nearly 250,000 long-term empty homes. Then there's a range of other forms of vacancy, homes that are vacant because people have died, which are counted in a kind of official exemption category. So that's 110,000 more just to start with. So, there are homes that are going to go through the system being naturally empty. But in addition to that, you've got your long-term empties, you've got your 253,000 so-called second homes. All we know about those is that no one lives there. Some of them may well be let on Airbnb. Some of them may well be people's holiday homes. But an awful lot of them are just various forms of vacant home, ranging from sort of buy to leave empty investments through, as I said, to Airbnbs and things that are just empty but furnished, things that may have been in other categories.
Thanks for that, Chris. Chris will have lots of data for us as we go through the hour about different areas that we're visiting. Today's event is being co-produced with the Open Protest Network, grassroots media network that platforms activists around the world. We thank them for their support. Before we go to our first live speaker, we will begin with a greetings video to the Day of Action from John Bird, founder of The Big Issue. The Big Issue is one of the sponsors of the day and has been a big backer of the Campaign Against Empty Homes since its launch last year. Here's the message from John.
Hi, my name is John Bird and I sit in the House of Lords as a crossbencher. And I'm very cross. I'm cross at the fact that there are 250,000 empty homes at the moment. And we've got more than 100,000 people living in temporary accommodation. If you look at all the magnitude of problems that causes for children and families, and those problems that start very, very young mean that they carry that problem with them for many, many years afterwards. I know about the problems of empty homes from my early childhood when many of the houses were slums, and I was born into a slum. But having housing problems in the early stages of your life cause enormous problems throughout the rest of your life. And it takes an arm and a leg's worth of effort to get out of those kind of problems. So I'm behind the Empty Homes campaign. I'm behind getting the government to do what it should do, and that is use its resources to bring empty homes back into the marketplace, back so that we can utilise them, so that we can use them for the benefit of the people who need them most. And I would like to say, have a really brilliant rally. But the other thing is, let's get those 250,000 houses, empty homes, let's get them back into the social equation so we can use them to help people to have better lives and fuller opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John, and thanks to The Big Issue for their support. They're really important backers of our campaign. Our first live speaker is Rachel Maskell, who's the Labour MP for York Central. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much for inviting me along today, and it's really great to join you. I'm here to highlight, obviously, another aspect of the housing crisis, but first of all, congratulate you on all that you're doing to address the issues around empty homes and the inappropriate use of property. And I'm particularly going to focus on the Airbnb, the short-term holiday let sector, and how that's just being exploited for extraction of property, opportunity, and wealth for those often far away from communities, but have seen that gap in the market where they can jump in and hoover up excess property. What we're seeing is not only new build going over to Airbnb, but also the current housing stock in areas. We're seeing the rental sector, the private rental sector, now flipping their homes because of the taxation issues and buy-to-let mortgages, flipping their homes over so that they now become Airbnbs, because you can drive so much more revenue off those homes. And I think this week we've all been seen that sign outside number 10 as well, haven't we, of that now being Airbnb. But even on the Balmoral estate, there was a property, or was it Sandringham, on the Crown estate, there was property which was being used as Airbnb. This is impacting on rural communities, hollowed out, schools closing, village shops closing, coastal communities, and of course in urban areas. And my private member's bill for its second reading on the 9th of December is to focus on licensing. So first of all, I've tried to amend the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. I put down my amendments on Friday. We'll bring that back at the report stage of the bill. And but what happened from that debate is that government ministers are willing to engage and talk. And I was really pleased. So I will be doing that, hoping that my private member's bill will then be the vehicle through which we can legislate. And we don't just need registration. Government consulted on that over the summer. But OK, we know where they are. I mean, we could just flip onto AirDNA and there we can see the properties. In my own constituency, I've got 2,118 live short-term holiday lets. That's 2,000 families not having a home. And when you've got a shortage of social housing and a shortage of private rental, as well as properties for the market, it really does impact on the community. It impacts on the economy, and it skews public services when they can't recruit because there's just simply not people there. But also it pushes up the prices of the housing market for everybody else. And clearly the whole thing is out of kilter now. What I have seen is on the darker side, this housing being used for criminal activity as well. So there is real interest from the police in this bill going through. So what my bill will seek to do is to, first of all, give power to local authorities to determine things like the fee for licensing, ensure that there is safety checks in those properties. We know in conventional bed and breakfast, you've got to jump through certain hoops to make sure that the property is safe, fireproof. You don't need the same certifications in Airbnb. So it will create a level playing field. We know that guest house and bed and breakfast are also being undermined at the moment, and many are exiting the market as a result because they just can't recruit people to stay with them compared to Airbnb, which is a cheaper option. But what we're also learning is that, as I say, there's criminal activity happening, but there is real exploitation. So my bill will put that safety certification in place. Also, it will create a list where residents will be able to have a direct contact of somebody responsible. So if you have got a party going on through the night, there will be somebody who will be held to account for that, and give local authorities the ability to remove that licence if the landlord isn't responsible, the guests aren't responsible, and not only from that property, but other properties that they hold, because it shows that they haven't put proper instruction in place. There's also environmental hazards which can occur as well. So landlords will be responsible for the properties that they have. And beyond that, though, we are also going to empower local authorities, if they choose to, is to create a control zone where they can say that in this area, for instance, a city centre area or postal district perhaps, or even a whole city, as we're seeing in the Scottish legislation, they will be able to determine in that space that there will be no new Airbnbs, or perhaps to be able to put a percentage on it like they do with HMOs at the moment, so that if somebody an authority said, actually, we do need some level of tourism, we do need some of this, they would have those options too. But it really does empower local communities. For me, that's what levelling up and regeneration is all about. But also it stops the exploitation where that can. So in somewhere like my constituency, we could put a blanket ban on, and that means no more Airbnbs. And bit by bit, if a house changes hands, then they would have to freshly apply for a licence, and of course that wouldn't go with the property. So if it was a licensed property, it wouldn't continue as such. So that legislation really does give the power to local authorities to make the determination. There will be a fee attached to that, so we can have a strong inspectorate, which is often a weakness in local authorities at the moment. And then people themselves will have more control back over to their communities, which is absolutely crucial with housing. And
Rachel?
Anyway,
Rachel,
I'm behind there,
that sounds absolutely excellent. Yeah, that sounds really excellent, and we're going to get right behind that bill. We really do. It's a really good, and thank you for speaking today. It's really appreciated. Thanks very much. Thank you. I'm going to press on now to our next speaker, who is Ellie Chowns, who's a national speaker on housing for the Green Party, which is also a national sponsor of the campaign. Ellie is group leader for the Green Party in Herefordshire County Council and a former member of the European Parliament. So can we bring Ellie in? Hi, Ellie.
Hi, Will. Hi, Chris. Thanks very much for inviting me along to speak today. And yeah, I'd like to start really by saying thank you to you for what you're doing, and to everybody who's watching, everybody who's involved in the campaign for action on empty homes, which is such an important cause. It's actually a kind of, an area that's really close to my heart. When I was 18, I took a year out and I spent some of it traveling around the UK and volunteering in various communities. And one of the places that I went to was a project in Leeds called Latch, Leeds Action to Create Homes. And I volunteered there. And basically what Latch did and still does, 25, 30 years later, is take empty homes owned by the council at that time, for paid for a very small amount, and then worked with people who were experiencing homelessness or insecure tenures and so forth, helping them to develop the skills to do up the houses, offering various sorts of support, and essentially enabling people who are homeless to house themselves in these new homes, bringing empty homes into use. And it was such an inspiring project, really, really fantastic. Brilliant that it's still going today. And I know there are lots of other similar sorts of initiatives around the country. So I'd really like to pay tribute to everybody who's doing something very, very practical at the local level to bring empty homes back into use in such a positive and constructive and inspiring sort of way. But we need we need the policy and the finance and all of the planks put in place kind of more broadly to support that. And Rachel was talking about that very passionately, as regards Airbnb. I mean, the Green Party absolutely believes, affordable, secure, comfortable accommodation is a basic human right. I took a motion to my own council yesterday, kind of essentially starting with that principle. And warm housing is a fundamental human right. And the inadequate, the inequitable provision of housing here today in the UK, it's a result of terrible inequalities in the market in access to resources, rooted in inequalities in land tenure in particular. The free market can't meet all the diverse housing needs that we need. And we've got a tragic lack of investment in public housing. We're trying to tackle that in Herefordshire after decades of having no council housing. We're trying to restart building, publicly owned housing there. But, government policy has essentially treated housing as a form of speculative investment. And we all know who's benefited from that. And there are an awful lot of people who have found that the housing market has really, really not worked for them. And it shouldn't be like that. Housing should be a basic requirement for human and for social well-being, essentially. We've got big inequalities within the country as well. You know, some areas have kind of got lots of under-occupied housing, and some areas have got far too many people for what's needed. So, you know, green housing policy is to make sure that everybody is provided with housing that's appropriate to their needs. We're also really conscious we need to make sure that housing doesn't impact on, you know, on other species in the planet more widely. So, you know, really key concern about the ecological impact of housing, and that really kind of you know, rings a bell with everybody now, given the fuel price crisis that we've got. And we really want local communities to have a stronger voice in housing policy, not just kind of projects that I've already talked about, but actually, you know, in that local policy. And, you know, we have policies to try to redress those inequalities in land through the gradual introduction of land value tax, through measures to deter speculative investment by introducing rent controls, more secure tenancies, and so forth. And, you know, to ensure that there are no incentives for owning multiple properties, with policies like, you know, council tax premiums on second homes, and that's actually something that we're exploring, looking into in Herefordshire at the minute. So, you know, we need mandatory premiums on long-term empty properties. You know, clearly we need to kind of use any of the levers that we have, whether at local or national level, to kind of deter the sitting on property, essentially, of investors and speculators and developers, rather than the use of that property to house people who so desperately need it, you know, as you've talked about, hundreds of thousands of people. So, you know, it's really clear that there is lots of scope for action, you know, at national and local level. There's brilliant activity that's going on in terms of specific projects like the Latches of the world. And as well as that, we need local authorities to take, you know, to use the limited powers that they do have currently. And crucially, we need government policy that cares about this, that puts in place, that uses the levers, the multiple levers of policy that are open to central government. Given the chaos of the government that we've got at the moment, you know, there is no more important time for people's voices to be heard. And, you know, I am a passionate supporter of the importance of protest as a means for citizens to make their voices heard. You know, we're seeing a real crackdown on that currently, and that's why it's crucial that we have events like this that kind of mobilize and energize and, you know, encourage and bring people together to make voices heard more loudly, to claim that fundamental right for affordable, secure, decent housing for all. So thank you, whoever you are, wherever you're watching. Thank you for what you're doing. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your contribution, Ellie. We know that Greens across the country are getting involved in the campaign, and we really, really welcome that. So thanks for your contribution. We're now going to go to our first live broadcast in Islington, which is being organised by Islington Homes for All. Islington, tell us about what your action today is about.
All right.
You're live.
Yeah.
You're live.
Hi, everybody. Start now?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi. Unfortunately, we are here again outside these 28 empty flats. These are 3 and 4 bedroom flats that have been empty for 10 years now. It's a scandal that in 2019, the Ministry of Justice, who owns this site, were due to hand over the flats to Islington Council on a long-term lease. They pulled out at the last minute, claiming that they needed to achieve value for money, put it on the market. So it's now owned by property developers who are resisting the 50% council housing on the site. We know that these flats now could have been renovated, they could have been insulated, they could have been families from the council's waiting list there living now. It's an utter disgrace. We know that millions of people in this country are on the breadline. Too many are living in substandard housing. Too many people with disabilities are living in inadequate housing, which means, you know, they can't afford to. They just haven't independent living. We see those few people who actually manage to buy a house at risk of losing their homes now because of rent rises. I think one of the worst things is for private renters. We're seeing their rents soaring. We know now that the Tories seem to be backtracking on the no-fault evictions, which has been no rights for private renters. Really, at the end of the day, we are saying there needs to be a fundamental change in housing policy. Some of those things, we could have a housing policy that allows local authorities to requisition long-term empty flats. We need to make it easier for councils to issue compulsory orders. I've got a minute left. Just 3 things I want to quickly say is that, one, I urge everybody to join the People's Assembly November the 5th day demonstration. We're going to try and get a housing block on it. I urge everybody to get down to the picket lines and support the workers. These workers are fighting not just for themselves, but for the rest of us to have a decent pay and living conditions. And I think fundamentally we need to get rid of this rotten Tory government. Thanks very much. So, are they introducing? So
yeah.
now,
Okay. So we have the local MP for Islington North, Jeremy Corbyn, who's going to give us 5 minutes from his view about the housing crisis and the empty homes crisis. Oh, thanks for attending, Jeremy. Over to you.
Hi, Jeremy Corbyn here from the demonstration outside these disgracefully empty flats just off the Caledonian Road here in Islington. We've been here so many times, even my bike knows its way here. We just come here and we maintain this demonstration. But you know what? This is symbolic of so much that's wrong with the housing situation in this country. Good quality homes that the council could put people in tomorrow morning to make sure that they get somewhere decent and clean and dry and warm to live in. And our council is not to blame for any of this. They've done everything they can to build more homes, to regulate the private rented sector, and to stand up for the poorest and most marginalised in our community. So what's rotten is the policies of central government. What's absolutely rotten are these policies that are creating more homelessness, more poverty, more stress for those that have bought a place and on mortgage, and those that in the private rented sector not knowing what their next rent level will be, and the local housing allowance that frequently doesn't begin to meet the levels of private rents being charged. And so inner city communities like ours are exporting the poorest and most vulnerable people to places long way away from their schools and their family connections and so on. Housing should be a right, an absolute fundamental human right. It is in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's what we should be doing. But instead, what we're doing is having a free market in housing, free market in rents, and attacking local authorities like my own that do their very best to deal with the local housing crisis. And so we'll be there on November the 5th on the big demonstration, because the demands of the rail workers, of the communication workers and the teachers are part and parcel of the same thing, a demand for rejigging our economy in the interests of the poorest and working people of this country. And that's why we're going to be there as part and parcel of it. It's not rivalry between demanding decent pay on the railways and decent housing. It's part and parcel of exactly the same demand and same campaign that we mount. I'm fed up with this Westminster soap opera about who's going to be the next Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's going to be the next Prime Minister, who's going to be the next God knows who in God knows what job. All I know is that our media are totally failing to report what is really happening in this country. Food banks running out of food, more and more people trying to get to food banks, more and more people homeless, a mental health crisis like we've never had before, brought about by economic insecurity. What we need is fundamental social justice. That's why we're marching on the 5th. Be there, whatever your cause, because united together, we link arms down that road. That's how we win. That's how we defeat this crazy system and bring about something, sense of justice and fairness, both here and around the world. Thanks very much for being on the call.
Thank you very much for that. Chris, can I bring you in, Chris? Tell us about the dates from Islington.
I was waiting for the top of it.
Chris, what can you give us the dates for Islington?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, as the protesters were saying in Islington, There's been a lot of good work done by the council there to try and bring as many homes as possible into use, but there are, there are still, as in most boroughs, several thousand homes out of use, second homes, long-term empty homes, and councils are restricted in terms of the powers available to bring them into use. And obviously that particular protest was focusing very much on a big bunch of flats that were originally owned by the Minister of Justice that the council wanted to turn into social housing, and the Minister of Justice turned their back on that offer to the people of Islington and sold them off to a developer who's now leaving them empty, which is the way they've been for about 10 years, which is a scandal that we see in many parts of the country.
Yeah, it's really, really disgraceful, actually. Thanks for that context, Chris. Really helpful. Our next speaker is Richard Boyd Barrett, who is a People Before Profit elected TD in the Irish Parliament. Emptiness and underutilisation are global issues, and Richard is leading campaigner on the issue in Ireland. Over to you, Richard.
Hi there, Will. Hi, Chris. And just to say thanks very much for asking me, and well done on the work you're doing on the campaign against empty homes in Britain. Yeah, I mean, the basic picture here is very similar to the one you described there. We have the worst housing crisis that the state has ever faced happening as we speak. There are about 120,000 families and households on the council housing waiting list. In my area, for example, if you're a housing applicant, you will be waiting 15 to 20 years to get a council house. We now have the highest number of families in emergency accommodation in the history of the state, and it has jumped about 25 to 30% just in the last year. So we have a really, really dire crisis facing people. But the solution is staring us in the face. The recent census that was carried out showed that there are 160,000 empty homes. That's not including holiday homes, by the way, in the country. There are about 20 to 30,000 derelict homes that have been identified, although the government haven't done a proper count of those derelict homes. And the other important thing that's apparent is there are about, I think it's about 80,000 planning permissions which are in, many of which are not being acted on. In other words, you have developers getting planning permissions on development sites, but then sitting on them waiting for the value of that property to rise. And of course, the worse the housing crisis gets, the more the value of that property rises. And then they speculate flipping these properties to other investors and so on. So it's an absolute scandal to do with the commodification and financialization of housing. And it goes side by side with a dramatic reduction in the provision of social and affordable housing over recent decades. So what have we done? Well, in the last few years, we set up a thing called the National Housing and Homelessness Coalition, which has left opposition political parties, trade unions, anti-poverty advocacy groups, housing campaigners. That then developed into a further alliance called Raise the Roof, which brought in the Congress of Trade Unions, our version of the TUC. And more recently, as part of the cost of living crisis, we have a new broad coalition, which largely overlaps with the housing coalitions called the Cost of Living Coalition. But the housing issue features as a central key part of the cost of living crisis. So we've been doing a number of things. We had big national demonstrations pre-COVID, and then more recently, before the budget, at the end of October, we had a major national demonstration, and we've been featuring the need for radical action by the government on vacant properties, to have a punitive vacant properties tax that would force these vacant properties into use. The government were forced to concede some measures in the budget in that regard. So they've introduced a vacant property tax, but it's not punitive enough. The profits being made from speculating on property are still too great. So this will not be enough. So next week in the Irish Parliament, I'm sponsoring a motion in our private members' time that has a number of features in it. But one of the key ones is calling for a 6-month use it or lose it policy. In other words, if there's a development site with planning permission, if there's a vacant property, if there's a derelict property, and it is empty for more than 6 months or not activated within 6 months, that the state would take that property and convert it into social and affordable housing. So that's one of the key things. And another element of that motion is calling for the establishment of a state construction company. Because the government often pleads, when it's being sort of criticised over its failure to act on this issue, that they don't have the capacity to deliver the scale of social housing that we need, or the refurbishment of the vacant property. But this is because they ran down local authority construction teams, if you like, to the point that they virtually don't exist. So we believe the state has to have its own construction capacity, coordinating with the local authorities, recruiting apprentices in the trades and so on. So we have the direct, rather than outsourcing to private developers or tendering out to private developers, that the state has its own construction capacity to rebuild and refurbish vacant property. We did also get a motion passed on foot of one of the big demonstrations we had pre-COVID, a right to housing, call on the government to hold a referendum on the right to housing. And the government have conceded that in principle. So they've said they will hold a referendum on housing, but of course they haven't done it because the landlords and the developers are screaming at the government not to do this, but they have committed to it. So for us, it's a matter of real pressure through street protests, through mobilizations. There's another national demonstration on housing being organised for 26th of November. We have a national day of action on cost of living and housing on the 12th of November. So there's a lot of activity, and then targeting local properties where there's empty properties. I mean, for example, opposite my office in Dunleary, its constituency in Dublin, there is an apartment block, 35 apartments. About 20 of them have been empty for 3 years. The landlord, a vulture landlord, is trying to evict the remaining tenants. So we have targeted that development and demanded that the state take it over, take it back off the developer, not just to prevent the evictions, but also then to use the empty apartments. And it looks as if we're going to succeed. So the good thing is the government are under massive, massive pressure on this. It is a national political story, but we need to keep building the momentum on the streets with protests and with the targeting and identifying of vacant and empty properties. So well done to you for your work, and it very much complements and coincides with the work we're doing.
Oh, well, thanks for that, Richard. That's really, really appreciated. And actually, in Europe, we know that Ireland is not alone in the European Union on this score. Spain and Italy also have a large number of empty homes going to waste. So it'd be good if we can bring everybody together into a European-wide project. Thanks for speaking. Thanks very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. We're now on our way to Lambeth for a live stream protest that's been organised by the Radical Housing Network. Come in, Lambeth. I think it's refurbish. Lambeth, are you with us?
Yep.
Yeah,
You're on. You're live.
Can you hear? Okay, Sabine, go for it.
Yeah,
Go for it.
Decided 8 years ago, they announced that they were going to demolish Central Estate, an award-winning, architecturally renowned estate that is home to 500 family households. Lambeth Council decided to demolish, and so therefore has been moving people out steadily since. Here we are, standing in front of 2 3-bedroom masonettes, one of possibly 100 empty properties on this beautiful estate. Lambeth Council refused to reinvest the money that is paid by rent, and it should be invested to repair homes on this estate. So people are forced to move out, and homeless people are not able to just move in and enjoy these houses. It's a useful social tenant. When this was built, it was for social tenants to find a home for the people in need and the vulnerable and those that they build alike. And yet Lambeth Council is deciding to demolish all of this, pushing people into other properties in Lambeth, so creating a ripple effect so that there are yet more and more homes being used up, rehousing people from this estate, only to demolish and rebuild into luxury flats. There are 400 empty council properties, which is far more than what the Lambeth Council plans to build with after the end of this demolition of this estate and 5 others. The amount of money that is being spent buying back property that are at least £400,000, a time is then being for the properties to be just left empty. This is not acceptable, and we are demanding that Lambeth Council rehouse people into these properties, but they repair them to a high standard, and they stop this absolute nonsense of Homes for Lambeth, which just spends all its time intimidating residents and not getting on with actually housing the homeless, which could be done in one stroke on this estate with the 100 properties that have been left empty. We are saying now, all of us are standing here saying enough is enough, and to use these empty properties and to stop spending and wasting our money buying back properties to leave them empty or to rent out privately. This is not what Homes for Lambeth or the council is meant to be doing. They are meant to be rehousing people. They have a duty and a responsibility to provide decent homes for all the members, all the residents of Lambeth Council. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lambeth.
No more empty homes.
Refurbish, don't demolish.
And refurbish, don't demolish.
Thanks very much, Lambeth. Thank you very much to the Radical Housing Network for supporting this protest and actually the financial support they've given us for the day as well. It's really appreciated. Chris, what's the overall data for Lambeth again?
Well, yeah, as people were saying, Lambeth, there's over 3,500 homes without residents. The vast majority of those are indeed empty homes, like the ones that are being talked about there. Many of them are homes that are being intentionally kept out of use, either by private landlords or, as the residents there were talking about, because the council is decanting its own estates to try and knock them down and rebuild them. And the knock-on effect, as they say, is a ripple out into the unavailability of social housing in other estates across Lambeth. So, okay. Yeah, I mean, that's very much what the protesters are protesting about.
Thanks very much. I'm going to press on now. Thanks for that, Chris. Our next speaker is Paula Peters from Orpington. Paula will speak about issues in her local community and on behalf of Disabled People Against Cuts. They are long-time supporters of the Empty Homes campaign. Welcome, Paula.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me speak today. And obviously, DPAC fully support the campaign against empty homes. For disabled people, I think it is so important that local authorities look at requisitioning empty homes, making them fully accessible and insulating empty homes. We've got more than 350,000 disabled people across England who are in completely unsuitable housing, and their access needs are not being met. We think that local authorities should be raising grants for adaptations, all new homes to be wheelchair accessible and should be green. And, you know, with local housing plans, they should be co-produced with disabled people. Now, down here in Orpington, which is Borough of Bromley, literally 2 minutes down the road from me, I've got 3 new builds that have been empty for 8 years that could home families. 2 ground floor properties that could be made accessible for disabled people, but Bromley refused to do that, and they're letting housing just sit there and just rot. But I do want to highlight a campaign, the Aurelia Housing campaign here down in Orpington. We've been fighting Aurelia Housing for almost a year. They wanted to demolish our local shopping centre, build 15 tower blocks for 980 flats. The for 1 bedroom flat was over 320,000, which was going to completely price people out of the area. None of these places were accessible. 3 tower blocks were going to be for assisted living over 55s, 15 stories, 10 stories and 8 stories, which is something I've spent over a year challenging the government on. I'm pleased to tell you that with massive opposition of nearly 4,000 objections, Aurelia have withdrawn the housing application. So we're gearing up for round 2. So campaigning is massively important. But, you know, with local authorities, you know, you have of the 350,000, more than 350,000 disabled people who have unmet housing needs. 1/3 are living in rented accommodation, and rents need to be frozen. You know, you've seen housing benefit cut across London, where you can only get single room rate. This is completely inaccessible for people in mental distress and trauma who can't share their homes with strangers. And you've got less than 1 in 4 local authorities have accessible housing register. and only 28% of that have a target for accessible housing. You know, the advice and support is inadequate for disabled people, and repeating often they've got nowhere to turn when in crisis, when their home is unsuitable, navigating the complex systems for allocating housing and securing adaptions. Here in Bromley, we've got over a 2-year wait for adaptions. My next door neighbour, who's waiting for a wet room, has had 3 falls off an inaccessible toilet, spending 1 admission to hospital for a month, and it's now taken, with support from me, to get the MP involved and local councillors to get the support he needs. But it's put absolute pressure and horrendous stress on the family, stress that they shouldn't have put through. The funding was granted, but Bromley are dragging their feet, and they say that there's a 2-year wait for adaptions to be put in, and that is an absolute travesty. So I am calling out Bromley Council on that, and Bromley need to pull their finger out, as do councils across the country, to sort this out. It's so important that we mobilise, we challenge these councillors, and also I would say, please, can people please support the CLADAC campaign, the disabled leaseholders campaign against cladding and unsafe building. They've been granted a legal challenge against the government. The government are saying it's too expensive to implement personal emergency evacuation plans in homes, and we fully support this campaign. They need support with funding to take the legal challenge forward. Also, to end on this, please support the People's Assembly demo on the 5th of November. I know for disabled people, it's going to be a nightmare to get across to support the demo, but we fully support the RMT in their strike action, because they're fighting for our safety and access, as well as their jobs and terms and conditions. But if you can get support to come to the demo, DPAC will obviously support where we can, but we need people out, and a big mobilisation for the 5th. And obviously to housing campaigners everywhere, we are totally behind this campaign, and housing should be a totally universal fundamental right. We all deserve a safe, a warm, and a space to call our own, and that is our homes. Solidarity, everyone, and thank you so much for having me speak to you all today.
Thanks very much, Paula. That's great to hear from you. I mean, I think it seems to me really obvious that if we're going to meet the climate emergency by retrofitting empty homes, then it makes common sense that they should be retrofitted for accessibility where possible. There's no excuse not to if we want to build a more equal society. Thanks, Paula. We're now going to go over to Orpington, from Orpington to Waltham Forest in London, where a protest is taking place there. You're on Waltham Forest.
Hello, welcome to Waltham Forest in northeast London. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You're on.
Good. I'll carry
3
on.
minutes.
This is Walthamstow. This is Walthamstow Village, Orford Road. This is the picture you'll see in the estate agent's windows. What you won't see is that this is the protest that we're having today. It's been by our council. They're now telling us it's not owned by them, but it according to the land registry, it is. Peter.
Hello.
Hello. Can you tell us something about what happens to homeless people at the moment in Walthamstow?
Okay, I'll just say something very briefly about your property. It's been empty for 4 years, and which shows a lack of action and energy to deal with empty properties in Waltham Forest. More generally, on homeless people, the majority of them do not get, the council does not accept a legal duty, and for those who does accept a legal duty, it places the majority of them in temporary accommodation or long-term accommodation outside the borough. So it has one of the highest proportions.
Okay. Oh, that's a shame. I think we're having problems with Waltham Forest. Chris, could you give us some data on Waltham Forest? Sorry,
yeah,
Waltham
sure.
Forest, we just can't hear you. Sorry. Go on, Chris.
Yeah, Waltham Forest has got about 2,000 empty homes. Around 1 in every 45 homes in Waltham Forest is empty or without residents. That means, which is a lot in a borough where acute housing. And clearly, as the protesters are showing there, there's a marked inability to make use of buildings which could be brought into use, including ones in some cases owned by the council or its housing partners. So, clearly,
I'm really sorry that didn't work for Waltham Forest, because they've been running a brilliant campaign there, and they're bringing lots and lots of public attention to it. It's always annoying when the tech doesn't work on a live broadcast on that. So apologies, Waltham Forest. Next up, we're going to hear from Emma Hookway, who is from North Devon and Torridge Housing Crisis Group, that was featured in The Guardian this week. Actually, over to you, Emma.
Hiya. We were in The Guardian this week. Interview with the Telegraph yesterday, actually, as well. So I started up the North Devon and Torridge Housing Crisis Group because of a personal experience of mine. I've lived in North Devon all my life. I grew up on a farm, and I've always rented because it's generally quite expensive to buy around here. So I just said the fact I was going to rent all my life. Never had a problem getting somewhere to rent. In fact, most properties I've ever rented, people have come to me and said, "Do you want to rent?" And then I'm given a Section 21, and I'd been in my house for 5 years, and the landlord back. And it's sad because I was my home, but I realised how little rental properties were out there, and so started looking, and there was nothing. And then you'd phone up, and you couldn't even get a viewing on a property. And my little boy, he's 7 now. By the time he was 6, and he's autistic. And he earwigs a lot, and he'd been earwigging on the conversations of me sort of getting a bit anxious, that we've now got 2 months to find somewhere, and 2 months has flown by already. And I had a little chat with him, and I explained to him how this has come about, and how people, obviously, after COVID, sort of reassess their lives, and that they, people want to come to North Devon on holiday to get by the sea. People decide they want to move here because obviously it's beautiful, and that meant that there's a shortage in the housing. Doing that, he was fine with it. After I explained it to him like that, I walked down the road and I burst into tears, and I felt completely helpless, and I was really worried that I wasn't going to be able to carry on living where I live. And it's a frightening thought that some place that you called your home for 42 years, you're going to get pushed out of, so that somebody could have a holiday, so that somebody can move into the area that's never lived here before. And so I put a little chat on our Facebook local page saying, "Has anyone else noticed that there's an issue going on?" And it just went, and there was about 300 replies by the end of the day. So I set up the group, and I started a petition to get our local MP to acknowledge that we were in a housing crisis. It went kind of nuts, really, from that point on. I've ended up having now a core group, so there's 6 of us at the core group, and they're great because I'm basically the person that sort of does the publicity, that kind of thing, because people tend to listen more if you've had the personal experience, I think, rather than somebody that's actually sitting there in their house and they own it. So that's why I generally am the person that comes out and chats and stuff. But we've held meetings where we've created a manifesto. We have taken it to local council, and we're working really closely now with them, and we're making differences. We've been to the Houses of Parliament to speak to Tim Farron, because obviously the Lake District is having the same kind of issues. And after we spoke to him, he said that he would call for a meeting in the House of Commons about housing issues, which he did, which was amazing. I've held like meetings where the MP, Sir Geoffrey Cox, came and actually met the people that have been going through being homeless. I think the group has provided a lot of support for people that are going through the process, because I felt ashamed when I couldn't provide. It makes you feel inadequate. And when you've got a group there that are supporting you, and you don't feel quite so alone. And I get a lot of people saying, "Oh, even though I might not have found a house, it's nice to know that they support it." And I think that's really one of the main things that the group has done. It's sort of brought people together to let them know that they're not alone. We hopefully we're going to be doing little next sort of demonstration. The idea is that we get chalk and we'll have facts about how the housing crisis is affecting North Devon, and we'll ask people to go and chalk it on the pavements or the cycle track, all that kind of thing, and they then get people to take photos of the facts and then upload it. So that's kind of our next move that we'll be doing. But yeah, it's been a very strange 16 months, and I think we've been quite successful in campaigning and making people aware that there is an issue in North Devon and Droitwich.
You've done Emma, thanks for your personal story and your campaigning story. You've done a fantastic job, actually, and you've really raised the issue across the country in the Guardian and the Telegraph. And I know you've got other things lined up, but we want to link you together with the Lakes, with the whole country, really, who are campaigning against the same problem. So good luck with that. Chris, what's the data for Emma's area?
Well, what's striking, if you look at Emma's area, is, I mean, you'll see that there are, in official government data, it'll tell you there's 3,000 odd homes that are empty. Twice as many of them are listed as furnished empties or second homes, over 2,000, as well as long-term empty homes. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, because you go and look on Airbnb and you'll see 15,000 homes advertised on Airbnb. And that's the thing, because Airbnb is currently unregulated and unlicensed, there's simply no proper recording of quite how many homes are being sucked out of use by Airbnb whole home rentals. And that's really striking in places like North Devon and Cornwall.
Okay.
That's huge impact.
It is a huge impact. Thanks very much, Emma. We're now going to travel from Devon to Wandsworth in London, where a protest is taking place. Let's bring Wandsworth in. Hi, Andrea.
Hi, everyone.
You got 3
sunny
minutes.
Wandsworth, can you see it? So can you see the lovely apartments that we've got here, but none of them are council homes. As you all know, we've got 11,000 residents in Wandsworth without a permanent home. They're living in temporary accommodation, and we've currently got these being built up, and only 386 of them are going to be council homes. So I've got my fellow friends here, if you can see them.
Yes, we can.
And we've also got more friends over here, security guards, that have been following us all morning. Can you see them? So we've had that today, and we've also got another one up there as well. So they're not very happy that we're down here exposing the fact that there's not enough homes for council residents here in Wandsworth.
So have you? So in terms of the campaign, Andrea.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So
yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Who owns those properties behind you? Who's building them? I can't quite see. Who is it? Do you know?
Yeah, they're not for obviously Wandsworth residents. I don't know who they're for, but they're clearly not for our residents. Some of these homes actually cost £7 million, one of them. And you know what? After they launched on the 14th of October last week, and some of these properties are even now on the resale page. So we already know what's going to be happening here. These homes are going to end up either being auctioned and not sold at all, and it's going to obviously impact the rest of the community here in Wandsworth.
Oh, Andrea, thanks for that report from Wandsworth, and thanks for your action. You've made the point beautifully about what's wrong with the housing market in this country. Thank you very much. It's really
no problem. Thanks a lot. Say bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Our next speaker. I'm going to press on, Chris, because we're running short of time. Our next speaker is from the United States. All over the world, people are facing the same problem. And I'm really pleased to welcome Bravan Ranga from the campaign group For the Many. On their website, it says, we are building a grassroots movement of everyday people to transform New York. So it works for all of us. Over to you, Bravan.
Thanks so much, Will. And thank you all so much for being here and for having me on. I'm so glad to be here with the Campaign Against Empty Homes, talking to fellow activists from across the Atlantic, fighting for housing justice. My name is Bravan, and I'm the political director at For the Many. As Will said, we're a grassroots organization in upstate New York, fighting for a New York State and an America that works for all of us and not just the greedy few. And we do that by building power among everyday people like students and immigrants and working class families. And one of the issues we hear from folks again and again is housing. People just can't afford to find a place to live. People are spending a huge amount of their income on rent. being forced to make painstaking decisions between putting food on the table or meeting the next medical bill or paying for their housing. And those who want to break into the middle class by buying a home find it impossible to do so because of skyrocketing home prices. And one of the most major contributors to that housing crisis here in New York and across the country is unregulated Airbnbs or other short-term rentals, as was mentioned earlier. Airbnb was originally designed for hosts to rent out part of their home for a few days at a time in order to make extra cash. But what's happening instead is absentee investors and corporate real estate are coming into our neighborhoods, buying up entire homes and listing them out exclusively as vacation rentals. Vacation rentals or whole home rentals are properties where the host doesn't live there and they're used exclusively as Airbnbs. And what this does is it takes up our already limited housing stock that could be used by long-term residents. It drives up prices, both for rents and for home prices, and it turns our neighborhoods into unregulated hotels. In response, what we've done with our partners is launch our Homes Are Not Hotels campaign, which aims to introduce laws that will ban those vacation rentals, so Airbnbs, where the owner doesn't live there, not all Airbnbs, and require hosts to annually apply for a permit and provide documentation that proves that they live on site in that unit. And also will bar Airbnb and other platforms from doing business from unregistered listings and require that they comply for information from the cities. So holding the platforms accountable as well. The city of New York actually recently passed landmark legislation last year to do just that. And several cities across the country have done that as well. But in upstate New York, where I live, particularly here in the Hudson Valley, we continue to have one of the biggest and most unregulated Airbnb markets in the country and minimal regulations to try and combat that. And so far, we've identified sponsors in multiple cities to introduce our law. We started mobilizing community members to city council meetings, started doing political education. We started making calls to our elected officials and building a broad coalition behind this. But we've seen investors and Airbnb hosts start to organize as well. And they've started to try and use their wealth and influence to try and fight back against us and against the majority. And so we're continuing to organize. We're continuing to fight back. We would love any kind of support that you could give us. You can learn more about our fight at forthemany.org. And I have faith that we're going to win because despite the power and wealth of Airbnb, this multi-billion-dollar corporation, and the corporate real estate interests that own all of these buildings, I know that we'll win because when everyday people come together, we have more power than the billionaires and the corporate elites. Thank you all so much for listening. I just want to say that, despite the fact that we're on different continents, we're in completely different countries, we're all in this fight together, fighting for housing justice and fighting for housing as a human right. So I'm so grateful to be in this fight with you. Thank you all so much.
Oh, thanks, Bravan. Thanks for speaking. Really appreciated. We're looking forward to working with Bravan as part of a global network challenging the blight of whole house shortlets that are creating real problems for communities around the world. We've got just 2 more live streams and 1 more speaker to go before we call it a day. The first live stream is from Kensington, and I believe we're going to hear from Emma Denko, the former MP for the area. Kensington, do come in. You're live.
Good morning. I've been fighting the Kensington-Chelsea empty home scandal for over 15 years, and sadly, we've made little or no progress under the Tory government. 10% of all homes in Kensington-Chelsea are designated empty homes, though some of those are also long-term empty. This building here, 1 Kensington Road, I've only ever seen 4 lights in it, but we're told that only half are empty, only half. Maybe that's fine. As our housing crisis gets worse, it's indefensible that we have nearly 2,000 long-term empty homes in the borough, And we also have 2,000 households living in temporary accommodation, mostly outside the borough, and that ruins their lives. I may not be heading back to Parliament, but I very much hope that the next Kensington Labour MP will take the baton and run with it. It is indefensible. The situation in Kensington and Chelsea is appalling, and we need our new Labour MP to tackle it full on. I was involved in making the laws of the Register of Beneficial Owners when I was in Parliament. I spent 2 years going through it line by line. It was then pulled by Theresa May and rushed back in again under Boris Johnson when the Russia-Ukraine war began. The law is not strong enough. It needs to be strengthened. It's way too oligarch-friendly, and there's plenty of loopholes in it. So they come up with an oligarch-friendly law, which won't make any difference at all. We must tackle this. The next Labour government must deal with this. It's absolutely crucial. They're forcing prices up artificially by keeping homes empty, while we have people in temporary accommodation outside the borough, and it's ruining their lives.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant. Thanks, Emma. Thanks for that contribution. And thanks to everybody in Kensington who's working on that issue. It's a really, really important issue. Chris, what data do we have for Kensington?
Well, as Emma was 2,000 empty homes in Kensington, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Beyond that, there are over 8,000 so-called second homes, many of them just locked up stores of wealth for in some cases oligarchs, in some cases investors from other parts of the country or from other countries of the world. Huge problem in Kensington and Chelsea. Even the Conservative Council there has said there's nothing they can do about these homes because the current legislation they have available is designed for dealing with homes that are sources of vandalism or antisocial behaviour. These are the homes of the rich. They're all locked up with security guards, you know, people coming around and putting wreaths on the door at Christmas and all sorts of things. But so a huge problem. 1 in 8 homes in Kensington and Chelsea has no one living in it. 1 in 8.
1 in 8.
And it's 1 in 10 in Camden. It's not just Kensington and Chelsea. You know, it's a huge problem in Camden, a huge problem in Westminster, a lot of the central London boroughs. But Kensington
All right.
is,
It's a big problem in central London. Before going to the final live stream in Southwark, we'll be hearing from housing campaigner from Unison, Phoebe Watkins, who plays a leading role in Unison's National Housing Forum. Welcome, Phoebe. Over to you.
Thanks for having me today. I'm really pleased to be speaking today, and I just want to say solidarity to all those on the protest today and the campaigns that it's been really inspiring. I think we urgently need to be able to share the ideas and campaigning to actually broaden it and include our demands, not just for homes for all, but making sure we're bringing the empty properties back into use. I've been working in housing for over 40 years, and throughout that time I've been an active trade unionist campaigning around housing, and mainly in Camden. My highlight was back in 2003-4, where we had a campaign. The council wanted to sell off the homes to an Almo, all of the homes, and we had a fantastic campaign, tenants and workers together. Tenants got a vote on it and had a fantastic 77% no, so we retained the homes within the council. But I don't need to tell people how dire the situation is. This disgusting Tory government that we've got at the moment of craven profiteering, and the hatred of us was really shown through the way that they've been behaving. So things have gone from bad to worse over the years I've been working in housing. The lack of decent affordable housing has made worse out of renting, being let on short-term lettings through Airbnb. In Camden, I think in all of the central London boroughs, families can't now find homes on affordable rents. So schools are now starting to close and roles are falling year on year. There's no money being put in for granting, for investing in new homes or retrofitting for better environmental standards. So we've got a huge job of work to do together. But sadly, there's very little political will to do something. The marketisation that people have already talked about in housing has really got going in the early 1980s. The Right to Buy scheme brought in by Margaret Thatcher, but the focus of that was to make us all homeowners. So somehow we're all going to vote Tory. The trouble with that is, the Right to Buy. Once that's gone, it's gone, and it's always going to remain in private hands. And in fact, there's more and more of it ending up in big property companies who are letting them out become big property speculators, including quite a lot of Tory MPs, I've got to say. Councils have always retained the responsibility to maintain a waiting list to house people in need, but they've been starved for years and years and years of the necessary investment. So in the 70s, the councils were able to use compulsory purchase orders to buy up slum properties, abandoned properties, and convert them into homes. But as housing becomes more and more of a commodity, that's ended. We need to bring that back urgently. There's currently well over 1 million people on formal council waiting lists. No one knows how many additional people, because there's barriers being put up to stop people going on the list in the first place. And some people don't even know that they can register for housing. So the number of people in need is far, far higher than that. So the means to change the sorry state of affairs with housing lies in the government's hands alone. The amount of private wealth held in the hands of private landlords, profiteering landlords, is absolutely obscene. So any government in power seems to fear that tackling the housing crisis risks them becoming more unpopular because they think the house prices might drop. Well, actually, it's so out of the realms of everybody's hands that it needs to drop drastically. Between 1945 and 1975, there was an average of 126,000 homes that were built each year, largely through councils, and that included through the Tory years. So even they saw at some point that it was needed to be done. So at the moment, there's an estimation we need at least 340,000 homes built per year, and of which of that there will be at least 150,000 social homes. And in recent years, in 2018-19 in England, just out of just 57,644 affordable homes built, just 6,531 were 10%, and it's estimated that actually over the whole of the UK, it's about 4% of new homes that are built that are social rents. The majority of those that are affordable rents are on 80% market value, or they're on shared ownerships, which is out of the realms of most people. So finally, I think there's a whole list of things, and people have talked about things we need to be doing, and I would just add to that, we need to build the homes we need, including the 150,000 a year social housing. Allowing housing associations to return to actually being providers, not just property developers. We need to restore government investment direct to councils. Councils need to take control of empty homes and fully repurpose them so people can be housed in them who need them. We need to lift the financial limits on welfare payments that Paula talked about. The bedroom tax, the benefit cap and local housing allowances need to be changed drastically. We need to re-empower local council planners to control Section 106 planning arrangements and impose climate-friendly standards. End the right to buy like in Scotland and Wales. Reform the private sector to make safe, secure and stable homes for all. Enough is enough. We need to bring this government down. We need to be out on the 5th of November protesting. I hope to see you all there. Thanks very much for asking me to speak.
Oh, thank you, Phoebe. That's great. And I really hope that Unison can play a role in the campaign in the future. Really appreciate it. I mean, of course, public sector workers are some of the lowest paid workers, despite being, as we found out with COVID, absolutely essential to everybody in the country. So housing is a really key issue for them. Thanks very much. Our final live stream comes from the campaigners in Southwark, who have a really strong record on housing campaigning. They've been key. They have all the key housing problems and far too many empty homes and buildings that could be lived in. Could you bring in Southwark, please, Marco?
Homes for people, not for profit. Homes for people.
Hello. I hope you can hear us.
Yes, we can.
Great. Yeah, so this is our 9th empty homes protest we've held in Southwark, and we're pleased to be part of the growing movement, the campaign against empty homes. We're joining you today from Peckham in the borough of Southwark, where there are currently 8,500 empty homes. It was reported just a few weeks ago. Some of these empty homes are private investment opportunities, but some are owned by the council. So this is a hostel that is owned by the council. It was closed down a few months ago to make way for a regeneration scheme. And you could probably see that behind me. There were 19 households in the hostel, including children who used to live here. As you can see, it's patrolled by a dog. That's the dog's car. It's patrolled by a dog 24/7. and a security guard visits the dog every now and then. This is to deter squatters. So the council, instead of collecting rent and housing local people, prefers to pay out for security services. Copeland Road Hostel and its homeless residents have been swept up in Southwark Council's regeneration plans. The hostel is included in Southwark Council's site allocation NSP 75, which covers a much wider site, including the Blackpool Road bus garage, which is behind us. The proposal includes a replacement bus garage, business uses and housing, but not a new hostel. These homes are therefore lost. Now, interestingly enough, the Southwark local plan policy, P10, prevents the change of use of hostels where a local need for the hostel exists, but the council have got away with closing the hostel because it will be demolished instead of reused for something else. This is absolutely shameful. Homelessness is increasing, and with the cost of living crisis that is set to get even worse. There's an even greater need for the hostel now and in the near future. Between April and June 2022, 129 people were recorded as having slept rough in Southwark. A total of 157 families have been housed outside of London in the last 3 years by Southwark Council, including in towns such as Reading, Maidstone and Southend-on-Sea. But it's not too late for Copeland Road. We're demanding Southwark Council reopens Copeland Road Hostel now. Stop sending homeless families out of London. People who are homeless should come before developers' profits. The fact is that Southwark Council has closed so many hostels over the past year. This is absolutely outrageous and cannot go on. We're asking this Labour Council to put the people that are homeless before profits. We say homes for people, not for profit.
Homes for people,
not for profit.
Homes for people,
not for profit.
Homes for people,
not for profit.
Homes for people,
not for profit.
Homes for people,
not for profit.
Homes for people,
not for profit.
Homes for people,
not for profit.
Homes for people,
not for profit.
Thank you, Southwark. Thank you very much,
people.
Southwark. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Great protest, and really glad to see you still going strong there. More work needed across the country, and you've been leading the way for some time. Thanks very much. Well, what an hour and a bit, I should say, we've had. Thanks to all of our speakers. Thanks to our local live stream protesters and others who've taken action today. I'd like to thank Chris Bailey, who's been giving us data when I've let him. He had a lot more to talk to you about, but we were running quite late, so I had to squeeze his time. Sorry about that, Chris. And behind the scenes, Jack Portman and James Farrow from Action on Empty Homes, who've been making sure everybody's been in the room. One more thanks to our co-producer, Marco from Open Protest Network, a grassroots media network that platforms protesters and activists around the world. If you're thinking of doing something like that, get in touch with us. We can put you in touch with Marco. You can see their contact details on the screen there. Get involved in campaigning against empty homes by visiting the website and joining the mailing list. To me, it's never been more clearer that houses should be about what they can be used for, places for people to live, and not about their investment value, their exchange value, how much cash you might get for them. They're for people to live in. There are more than enough empty and underused properties to make sure that everyone, those without a home, those in temporary accommodation, those in overcrowded accommodation, those seeking refuge in Britain from around the world and a decent place to live, there's more than enough to go around. So get involved in campaigning against empty homes by visiting the website and joining our mailing list. Thank you for your watching. And if you're watching the record, thank you for watching the record. Get in touch. Let's take action. Goodbye.